In February 2013, the body of 21-year-old Canadian student Elisa Lam was discovered inside a water tank on the roof of the Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. Her disappearance and the circumstances surrounding her death have since become one of the most chilling and mysterious cases in modern history, filled with eerie twists that feel like they've come straight out of a horror movie. The disappearance. Elisa Lam had been staying at the Cecil Hotel during her trip to Los Angeles. The Cecil itself has a dark history, having been associated with murders, suicides, and even a brief stay by serial killer Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, in the 1980s. Lam's plan was to travel through California, keeping her friends updated on her whereabouts through social media. However, on January 31, 2013, her daily updates suddenly stopped. She was supposed to check out of the hotel but never did, and her family reported her missing soon after. The elevator footage. About 2 weeks after her disappearance, the LAPD released a bizarre security video from one of the hotel's elevators, which would become central to the case and the subject of much speculation. In the video, Lam is seen behaving erratically. She enters the elevator and presses several buttons, but the doors do not close. She steps in and out of the elevator multiple times, looking as though she is hiding from someone or something. At one point, she steps outside the elevator and gestures as if speaking to an unseen person or presence. The strange behavior caught on tape, along with the elevator doors refusing to close, gave the footage an eerie, almost supernatural quality. The discovery of her body. Hotel guests began complaining of low water pressure, strange-tasting water, and discolored water flowing from the taps. On February 19, a hotel maintenance worker went to check the rooftop water tanks and made a gruesome discovery: Elisa Lam's decomposing body floating inside one of the tanks. Her body was found naked, and her clothes were floating next to her. The tank was difficult to access, and the hotel staff confirmed that the only way to reach the roof was through a locked door, which set off an alarm if opened, or by scaling the exterior of the building. This led to questions about how Lam could have ended up in the tank in the first place. The investigation and theories. The autopsy report found no evidence of trauma or sexual assault, and toxicology tests revealed only traces of her prescription medications for bipolar disorder. The cause of death was ruled as accidental drowning, but many were not satisfied with this explanation. Her erratic behavior in the elevator video led to theories that she was experiencing a psychotic episode, influenced by her mental health condition. Others speculated that something more sinister was at play, perhaps she was being pursued by someone or something unseen. Some even suggested paranormal involvement, given the Cecil Hotel's dark history. Unanswered questions. How did Elisa Lam end up in the water tank? Why was she acting so strangely in the elevator? How could she have accessed the rooftop and climbed into the tank without setting off alarms or being seen? These questions continue to haunt those who have studied the case, and many feel there are aspects of her death that remain unexplained. The Elisa Lam case captured global attention due to the mysterious circumstances and eerie nature of the evidence, particularly the elevator footage. It has since become the subject of documentaries, podcasts, and online forums, with theories ranging from mental illness to murder to supernatural interference. The case remains officially closed, but for many, it is an open-ended horror story that offers more questions than answers. One of the most terrifying unsolved crimes in American history, the Villisca Axe Murders, took place in Villisca, Iowa, in 1912. On the night of June 9, 8 people, including 6 members of the Moore family and 2 guests, were brutally murdered with an axe while they slept in their home. The Moore family, consisting of parents Josiah and Sarah Moore, and their 4 children, were a well-respected family in the community. That night, they had hosted a church event, and 2 of their children's friends, Ina and Lena Stillinger, were invited to stay over. After the family and their guests went to bed, an unknown assailant entered the house and systematically bludgeoned all 8 people to death with an axe found on the property. What makes this case particularly eerie is the gruesome and ritualistic way the murders were committed. The killer covered all the mirrors and windows in the house with cloth, possibly to avoid seeing their reflection. The faces of the victims were covered as well. Lena Stillinger, one of the guests, was found in a different position than the other victims, suggesting she might have woken up during the attack and fought back, making her death even more horrific. Despite several suspects being investigated over the years, the killer was never caught, and the case remains unsolved. The house where the murders took place is said to be haunted, with many claiming to hear footsteps, disembodied voices, and doors opening and closing on their own. The sheer brutality of the crime, combined with the fact that it was never solved, leaves an unsettling feeling that the murderer might have continued living among the townspeople, unpunished and unknown. After the murders in Villisca, the investigation became a nationwide sensation. Despite the primitive forensic techniques of the time, law enforcement worked tirelessly to try to piece together what had happened. Bloodhounds were brought in, and several suspects emerged, but no one was ever definitively linked to the crime. One of the main suspects was a man named Reverend George Kelly, a traveling preacher who had attended the same church event as the Moores the evening before the murders. Kelly had a reputation for being unstable, with strange obsessions about young girls. He even left Villisca by train early the morning after the murders, which only increased suspicions. At one point, Kelly actually confessed to the crime, saying he had been compelled by a divine voice to kill the family. However, his confession was erratic, and he later recanted. There was no physical evidence tying him to the crime, and he was eventually acquitted after 2 trials. Another suspect was Frank F. Jones, a local businessman and state senator. Josiah Moore had once worked for Jones but left to start his own business, taking key customers with him. Some believed there was lingering resentment between the two, and rumors swirled that Jones had hired a hitman, William Blackie Mansfield, to commit the murders. However, there was little evidence to support this theory. Several other suspects were considered over the years, including transient workers and drifters, but each investigation hit a dead end. One of the more chilling theories involves Henry Lee Moore, no relation to the victims, a man who had murdered his own mother and grandmother with an axe just months after the Villisca murders. Some believe he could have been a serial killer traveling across the country, leaving a trail of axe murders in his wake. The lack of modern forensic tools like DNA analysis meant that the case quickly grew cold. What haunts many people to this day is the thought that the killer, whoever they were, might have gone on to live a normal life, walking free among unsuspecting townspeople. The Villisca Axe Murder House, now a historical site and museum, has become infamous not only for the gruesome crime but also for the paranormal activity reported there. Visitors and paranormal investigators have described eerie occurrences, whispered voices, phantom footsteps, and objects moving on their own. Many believe the spirits of the Moore family and their young guests still linger, unable to rest because their brutal killer was never brought to justice. The case remains one of America's most infamous unsolved mysteries, a dark reminder of how evil can strike even in the most peaceful, unsuspecting places. A few more eerie and puzzling details that make the Villisca Axe murders even more unsettling. One particularly strange aspect is that the killer is believed to have stayed in the house for some time after committing the murders. It appeared that after killing the Moores and the Stillinger girls, the murderer calmly covered all the mirrors and reflective surfaces in the house with cloth or clothing, as if not wanting to see their own reflection. The killer then washed their hands in a basin that was found full of blood and water. There was also uneaten food left on the kitchen table, suggesting that the killer might have helped themselves to a meal before or after the murders. This level of composure is deeply disturbing, as it implies that the murderer didn't panic or flee immediately. It's as though they felt completely in control and unafraid of being caught. Adding to the mystery is the fact that the murder weapon, Josiah Moore's own axe, was left at the scene, carefully cleaned but left in a bizarre position next to the body of one of the victims. The murderer also left a piece of a keychain on the floor, a potential clue that led nowhere. An important but often overlooked fact is that neighbors didn't notice anything unusual during the night of the murders. The house was in a small, tight-knit community, and yet no one reported hearing screams or sounds of a struggle. This has led some to speculate that the killer may have been known to the family, allowing them to enter the home without raising alarm. Lastly, the fact that no one was ever convicted despite multiple confessions adds to the sinister nature of the crime. Over the years, several people came forward claiming responsibility for the murders, but their stories were inconsistent or dismissed as attention-seeking. Even with advancements in forensic science, the case remains frustratingly out of reach for investigators, making it all the more chilling for those interested in true crime and unsolved mysteries. These extra details, ritualistic acts, the calmness of the killer, and the eerie lack of disturbance, continue to spark interest in the case, making the Villisca Axe murders one of the most horrifying and mystifying crimes in American history. If you have any comments, additions, or inquiries about these stories, add them in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share the video to spread the benefit. In 1922, a gruesome crime occurred on a small, isolated farm in Bavaria, Germany, known as Hinterkaifeck. The family living there, Andreas Gruber, his wife Casilia, their adult daughter Victoria, and her 2 children, were brutally murdered with a mattock, a type of pickaxe. Days before the murders, strange things had been happening. Andreas Gruber noticed footprints in the snow leading to the farm but none leading back. The family also heard footsteps in the attic and found a strange newspaper that no one in the house had bought. Their maid had recently quit, claiming the house was haunted. On March 31, 1922, the unknown assailant lured each family member, one by one, to the barn where they were killed. The murderer then entered the house and killed the 2 youngest members of the family, including Victoria's 2-year-old son. Even more eerie, the killer remained on the farm for several days after the murders, eating the family's food and caring for the livestock. Neighbors discovered the bodies 4 days later after noticing the family had not been seen for some time. Despite multiple investigations, the killer was never caught, and the case remains one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries in German history. The combination of supernatural signs before the murders and the unknown assailant living in the house afterward adds to the horror. The case has haunted investigators and true crime enthusiasts for decades, leaving many to wonder who committed the gruesome act, and why. In the heart of Philadelphia stands the crumbling remains of Eastern State Penitentiary, once the most feared prison in America. Built in 1829, it was designed to isolate inmates completely, subjecting them to an innovative, and torturous, method of rehabilitation, total solitary confinement. Prisoners were held in tiny, windowless cells, their only light coming from a narrow slit in the ceiling. Silence was strictly enforced. Even the guards wore padded shoes to muffle their footsteps. The prison quickly became infamous for the brutal psychological toll it took on inmates. Many went insane within months of confinement. Rumors spread that the very walls of the prison had absorbed the madness, and the tortured spirits of the inmates lingered long after death. Inmate D-13, the Watcher. One of the most notorious inmates was a man named Henry Millard, prisoner D-13. He was sent to Eastern State in 1862 for a grisly murder. Millard had brutally killed a local store owner after a petty argument, and his trial was sensationalized in the newspapers. When he arrived at the prison, the warden, Elam Lins, made sure he was subjected to the harshest conditions. Millard was thrown into cell block D, a section of the prison known for its sinister history. The other prisoners claimed the cells were cursed. Strange noises and shadowy figures appeared at all hours of the night. No one who spent time in cell block D left with their sanity intact. Millard was defiant at first, swearing to survive his sentence. But as weeks turned into months, the isolation began to chip away at his mind. He started hearing whispers, low, guttural voices that echoed through the walls of his cell. The voices never stopped, no matter how much he covered his ears or screamed into the void. Soon, he began seeing things, shadowy figures that crept into his cell in the middle of the night, watching him from the corners of the room. He called them the Watchers, but no one believed him. The guards dismissed his claims as the ravings of a madman. Yet, other inmates in cell block D reported similar experiences. Some refused to sleep, fearing what they might see if they closed their eyes. One cold December night, Millard's cell door swung open by itself. The guards found him standing in the center of the cell, staring blankly at the narrow slit in the ceiling. He wasn't moving, wasn't blinking, just standing there. His eyes, once defiant and full of anger, were now glassy and lifeless. He didn't respond when they called his name or tried to move him. The guards, unnerved, dragged him from the cell, thinking he had suffered some kind of breakdown. As they carried him down the corridor, Millard muttered one final sentence before he collapsed: "The Watchers are here." The next morning, he was found dead in his new cell. The coroner said he had died of natural causes, his heart had simply stopped. But the prisoners and guards knew better. They said Millard's death was no accident, the prison had claimed him, just as it had claimed countless others before. The strange case of Block 12. Decades passed, and the horrors of Eastern State continued. In the 1940s, strange reports began to circulate about Cell Block 12, an area of the prison that had been largely abandoned. The guards refused to patrol that section of the prison at night, claiming it was haunted by something far more sinister than the inmates. One guard, Thomas Clark, took it upon himself to investigate. Clark was a skeptic by nature, dismissing the ghost stories as the wild imaginations of superstitious men. Armed with a lantern, he ventured into Block 12 late one evening to prove that nothing was lurking in the shadows. He made his way through the dark, crumbling corridor, his footsteps echoing eerily off the stone walls. The air grew colder the deeper he went, and the light from his lantern flickered weakly. As he passed by the old, rusted cell doors, he heard something. A whisper. At first, he thought it was the wind, but then the sound grew louder, multiple voices, muttering in a language he couldn't understand. Clark stopped in front of cell 34, a particularly notorious cell. The door was slightly ajar, which was odd, since no prisoners had been held in Block 12 for years. He felt a chill crawl up his spine as he approached the door. The whispers grew louder, and he could feel the cold breath of something unseen on his neck. Pushing the door open with trembling hands, Clark's lantern flickered and went out, plunging him into darkness. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, the whispers started again, right behind him. He spun around, but no one was there. The corridor was empty. Heart racing, he fumbled with the lantern, trying to reignite it. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold it steady. Finally, the lantern flared to life, casting dim light around the cell. That's when he saw them. Dozens of shadowy figures stood in the corridor, their hollow eyes glowing faintly in the dark. They weren't solid, but he could make out their twisted, contorted shapes. They were watching him, just like Millard had said. The Watchers. Clark stumbled back, his mind reeling. The whispers grew louder, turning into a cacophony of voices that filled the air, pressing in on him. He ran, abandoning the lantern, sprinting through the dark corridors back to the guard station. He never spoke of what he saw that night, but the haunted look in his eyes told the other guards everything they needed to know. After that, no one dared enter Block 12 again. The closing of Eastern State. Eastern State Penitentiary finally closed its doors in 1971, but its haunted legacy endures. The prison, now a museum, is visited by thousands of people each year, many of whom report hearing disembodied voices, footsteps, and even seeing shadowy figures lurking in the corners of the abandoned cells. Paranormal investigators have flocked to the site, drawn by its notorious history. Some claim to have captured EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, and footage of ghostly apparitions, while others have felt unseen hands grabbing at them as they walk through the empty cell blocks. Visitors to Cell Block D, in particular, often report feeling an overwhelming sense of dread, as if they're being watched by something unseen. Some claim to have seen a figure in a white prison uniform standing in the shadows, watching them silently. Could it be Henry Millard, still trapped in the prison that claimed his life? To this day, no one knows for sure. But one thing is certain, Eastern State Penitentiary holds on to its ghosts, and they are always watching. Though heavily fictionalized, Eastern State Penitentiary is a real place, and it is widely considered one of the most haunted locations in America. Many of the details of this story, such as the solitary confinement and psychological effects on prisoners, are based on historical facts, making the prison's dark past even more chilling. In the winter of 1803, the people of Hammersmith, a small suburb in London, were terrorized by sightings of a ghostly figure that roamed the streets at night. Dressed in white with hollow, glowing eyes, the figure seemed to float just above the ground. Word spread quickly that it was the restless spirit of a man who had been buried in the local churchyard. The man had died under mysterious circumstances, his death said to be a suicide, and according to legend, those who took their own lives could not rest in peace. Every night, more reports came in of the ghost attacking people. The figure would lunge at unsuspecting passers-by, sometimes grabbing them, leaving them paralyzed with fear. Some said they could feel its icy hands around their throats. Panic swept through the town as the sightings became more frequent. People refused to leave their homes after dark, fearing they would be the next victim. One bitterly cold night, a local man named Francis Smith decided he would put an end to the terror. Armed with a loaded pistol, he patrolled the streets, determined to find the ghost and confront it. As he turned a corner, he saw a white figure moving toward him, gliding silently through the fog. Without thinking, Francis raised his pistol and fired. The figure crumpled to the ground, but when Francis approached, his blood turned cold. The ghost was not an apparition at all, but a man, a local bricklayer named Thomas Millwood, who had been wearing his work clothes, a white apron and jacket. Thomas had been mistaken for the ghost, and now lay dead in the street. Francis was arrested and put on trial for murder. His defense was that he genuinely believed he was shooting the ghost that had haunted the town for weeks. The court, torn between superstition and the harsh reality of a wrongful death, sentenced him to death, though his sentence was later reduced. However, after Thomas's death, the sightings of the Hammersmith ghost stopped, leaving the town in an uneasy silence. To this day, some believe that the real ghost, the one that started the hysteria, was still out there, silently watching from the shadows. They say it still haunts the streets, seeking vengeance for the innocent blood that was spilled. Those who dare walk the streets of Hammersmith at night sometimes report feeling a cold, unnatural breeze and catching glimpses of a pale figure out of the corner of their eye. But when they turn, no one is there.